See her. All right, it's 2 o'clock. I'll call the Committee of the Whole meeting to order, and we will start with the land acknowledgement. The City of Fort Saskatchewan is located within Treaty 6 territory and Métis Nation of Alberta, District 11, the ancestral and traditional home territory of the Nihayewak, Dene, Blackfoot, Saulteaux, Nakota Sioux, Métis. We acknowledge the many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit whose footsteps have marked these lands for generations. It is because of our treaty relationship that we can live, work, and play on Treaty 6 territories. Should I do this one? Yeah. Okay. All right. Can I call for someone to approve the minutes of the October 17th? We haven't had a Committee of the Whole meeting since then. 2023 meeting minutes. And we have Mayor Ketcher. Oh, what do I have to do? Sorry.
I know it's tricky. There's that little button thing in there.
Oh.
There's a little pen in there that works.
Okay.
All right, so I would like to move the approval of the minutes of October 17th, 2023 Committee of the Whole meeting as printed and circulated.
Is there anyone that has any omissions or errors? Okay, please cast your vote. That is carried, 7, all in favor. Do we have any delegations that would like to come forward with anything that will be discussed in this meeting? Okay, seeing no delegations, we'll move on. Our first presentation is from Nutrien, and we have Corey Wald and Dr. Connie Nickel.
Perfect. Okay.
Okay, welcome. And we have 15 minutes for your presentation. I hope that works.
Okay. Well, thank you. Thanks, Aaron, for the invitation, and Mayor Ketcher and Council. Thanks for inviting us here today. It's my privilege to give you a little overview of our operations, and the fun story, of course, that everybody wants to hear is some of our ESG projects that Connie has played a primary role in her 20 plus years with the company. So I get the privilege of showing you the pictures and talking about it, and then Connie's here for technical, so we'll just jump into it. So we were asked, of course, well, who are we, right? Who is Nutrien, and where are we these days? So if you look at the screens, that purple line is roughly our property line these days. We'll talk about how we came to that in just a couple of future slides. Way in the top right-hand corner, you can see the abbreviation City of Fort Saskatchewan. So our property does back on to our residential neighbors in the Sheridan neighborhood. That'll be an important term to keep in mind as we step through here. And then you can see how Sherritt's been kind of carved out of that bigger property, and how we've kind of got everything between 119th, the Sheridan property, the riverbank, out to 99th there. So that's who we are. And then there's some other little interesting little boxes which we don't need to get into, but with our business agreement with Sherritt, they do actually operate some of those facilities within our property, our bigger property. So that's who we are. Just to the east of where we sit today. And then as part of the presentation, I thought, you know, there's a long history here with the various companies that have come together to form Nutrien. And I started in no particular order with Cominco, played a big role. Cominco dates back to 1896. I'm not going to read the whole thing. It's there for you to have a look at later. But basically, Agrium, who we all knew up until 1996, formed out of Cominco, which formed out of the smelters back in the 1900s, which was very intertwined with Canadian Pacific Railway, which is kind of interesting. And we were Agrium, of course, until 2018 here at this site, so 1996 to 2018. But there's a little bit of the history of Cominco. Like I said, there's a lot of words there, and we've got a short time, so you can have a look at that more if you like later. In the meantime, what was happening in parallel was Sherritt Gordon Mines came along in the early 1900s. Now, as you can appreciate, Sherritt Gordon Mines and Cominco Mines were competitors in those days. And Sherritt had a little bit of a different focus. They were doing metals and a lot of work in Cuba and kind of offshore, whereas Cominco was more Canadian based. So I think we all know the history of the site here. 1950s, Sherritt comes to town, they build the smelter, they build the first ammonia plant to support the smelter, and then in the 80s, they build actually the facility that we work in right now. So it was through the later division of that company and the acquisitions by Agrium and the formation of a company called Viridian, where we attained some of the liabilities, we'll call them, that Connie's been working on for, like I said, kind of 25 years on part of this ESG. So there's the Sherritt history up to 96. And then, because we can't forget about our friends at Potash Corp, back in the 50s, again, was a very booming time for industry in Canada. Patients Like Mine started. And when I was doing the research, I was surprised to find that actually the potash mines in Saskatchewan were all privately owned at one point. So the provincial government, because we all know Potash Corp of Saskatchewan, actually didn't come along until the 70s, where they bought up controlling interests in those mines to try and bring some stability to the potash prices. So it's a little bit of a learning for me. I thought it was interesting, so I put it up there. And then Potash Corp changed. It became a publicly traded company. And then in 2016, the merger between Potash Corp and Agrium was announced. And we've been Nutrien since January 1st, 2018. And that brought the Sherritt legacy together, the Cominco legacy together, and the Potash Corp into Nutrien. So that's who we are. That's what we do today. Today, Nutrien is one of the largest suppliers of nitrogen, potash, and phosphate fertilizers in the world. And that's who we are. We're a fertilizer producing company. The goal is feeding the planet, of course. Growing population, shrinking arable land drives the need for nutrients, for crop nutrients. And anybody who's been around farming for a few years probably sees that. I remember my grandfather and the yields he would get off of the crops back in the 60s and 70s, and it's much different today. So you'll see Viridian pop in there, and Viridian plays a key part in what we're going to talk about in just a few minutes. But since you've given me this opportunity, we do have to brag a little bit. Some recent accomplishments besides the ESG projects. in 2023, we celebrated 40 years in operation. And I didn't get the exact date, but it was May 4th or 5th, somewhere around there. In 1983, we produced the first ton of ammonia out of what they call FERT-2, which is what Sherritt called FERT-2. It was Sherritt at the time. So 2023, we hit 40 years. We didn't have a chance to celebrate it last year because we had a major outage, but we're going to do something to celebrate that formally this year. So that was a big milestone for the site. And some of you may be aware, I'm sure you are, we were also nominated and won the 2023 Industrial Business of the Year through the Fort Saskatchewan Chamber of Commerce. So that was kind of cool. So yeah, it's been as Gail and I were talking about in the hallway, it's been quite a year, 2023. So the fun part, reclamation and afforestation projects. Again, Connie's been working this conceptual thing for decades, long time, and just in the last few years we've had the chance to actually try it out and put this theory to the test. And I think, yeah, okay, we'll get into some pictures. So the first tree trial, we called it, began in 2015, so you can see some pictures up there. All of this work is done in collaboration with the University of Alberta, Canadian Forest Services, and in total we've reclaimed about 40 hectares of historical ponds and stacks of byproduct gypsum using trees. The first research was in 2015, where we planted 500 willow cuttings in a reclaimed pond. And you can see from left to right the progress, so that's how they showed up. In little bundles of sticks. Then they went into the ground, and by August 2015, we already had, you can see they're probably about a foot 18 inches high in that far right photo. Moving on, 4 and 5 years later, so this is the same little twigs in 2019 and 2020. And we do pick the shortest people who work for us. just for that dramatic. No, actually that's not true. But well, Connie's here. You can tell. But it is quite impressive. So we moved on from there to look at some larger scale forests. So the same concept to reclaim stacks of byproduct known as gypsum, starting in 2016. On this one, on the bottom, from left to right again, there were 44,000 trees planted between 2016 and 2022, over a 20 hectare footprint, most of them hybrid poplar, but also some willow, lilacs, white spruce, Saskatoons. And trees were planted on a concentrated grid to maximize biomass and carbon accumulation. So I think it may not be clear from this photo, but it's actually on a grid, like on a square grid. So when you look at our forest, if you're ever out there to have a look at it, it is actually square. You can see the rows, and there's reasons why we did it that way for maintenance. It's not like a naturally growing forest where things just kind of grow everywhere. And yeah, I think we'll get to a different picture in a second. So this is, sorry, let me just back up. So this is what we call GIPSTAC 4. This is 2016. And if we jump ahead, there is GIPSTAC 4 in 2020. We're told those trees are growing about 3 to 4 times faster than the best land at the University of Alberta tree farms. 3 to 4 times. And then here they are 6 years later, so 2021. And the picture on the right, well, actually both of these pictures, you can see that they're starting to close canopy. And that's the goal, because there are methods of closing gypstacks that say you should grow grass. But when you grow acres and acres of grass, you create another problem. You got to cut that grass, right? So the plan here, as Connie had devised, was to plant the trees close enough together so they close canopy, and then you don't get the grass growth underneath. And then you just have the natural attenuation of the trees. And you can see it happening here. Those canopies have closed off. So here's a drone shot, and I labeled a few things here. This was the summer of 2015. We're kind of going back in time a little bit. Closest to us is GIPSTAC number 4. A little further in the distance is GIPSTAC number 3. and further in the distance is phos acid cooling pond number 1. Now I promised you we'd come back to Viridian. Viridian was a company that Sherritt formed to take over fertilizer assets, and this facility actually ran as Viridian for about 18 months back in the 90s, if anybody can, getting a nod there from Councillor Harris, yeah. So it was short-lived, but it was a time of mergers. So Sherritt had formed Viridian. Now, Viridian, because it was a fertilizer arm of Sherritt, actually took ownership of these stacks and phos acid cooling ponds. Agrium never actually operated the phosphate plant, which would have generated these things. But because Agrium acquired Viridian, right, we got the assets, we'll call, along with it. So that's kind of the tie-in, right? If you know your history and you're thinking, well, Agrium never produced phosphate, well, we didn't, but it was part of the acquisition. So here's how it looked in 2015. Again, you can see that we're just starting work on gypstack number 4. You can see phos acid cooling pond, which is to the right. The label's in the middle there. That's where the willows were planted earlier that year. So they're just starting to take root there. But if we jump ahead to the next picture, there's 2022. And again, if you just kind of look at that, gypstack 4, it's all white. There's no topsoil. 2022, the forest is almost fully developed. Gypstack 3, you can see it's a little bit later. We did that a couple years later, and the forest is still filling in there. And way off in the distance in this one, at the top of the frame, is gypstacks 1 and 2, and phos acid cooling pond number 1, which you'll notice is no longer there. So we actually moved just about half of the material that made up gypstack 1 and 2 into phos acid cooling pond number 1. Working with Alberta Environment to make sure that they had any of their concerns addressed. And so we've made that pond disappear. And the concept here is that if we stop the infiltration of stormwater into that pond, we should increase the quality of the groundwater. And so far, the other projects are proving that to be true. So this is a big win for this area, for the Beverly Channel that we sit on. We believe that phos acid cooling pond was a major source of some of the contamination we were seeing. So this is a big win. And I think I got a better picture of it coming up. Yeah, there it is. So there's that phos acid cooling pond before. It was just an open pond. You know, it would fill with runoff. The melt, the stormwater. Here it is under construction. So we're moving that gyp from the south end into the pond itself. And then here's sort of the finished product. You can see the topsoil just going on, but you see again that pond is gone. It's disappeared. So we cut those stacks down by almost half of what they were. There it is, topsoiled and blended in to create the seed bed for the trees. And then this was last June, so keep that in mind. June 5th? 7th. Day 1 of the turnaround. Of course. Timing's everything, right? So we created along with the pond and the gypstacks, it's a 17-hectare area was reclaimed. And the folks came out, 26,000 hybrid popular trees planted, as Connie said, starting June 7th. We expect the trees to grow about 1.5 to 2 meters per year. So by June 2024, a couple meters, which for us people who remember the old system would be about 6 feet. They create a wildlife habitat, look beautiful, improve ground soil. And I think our last picture here. So Dominique, who's our tree model for 2023, is a person of average height, and beside her you can see one of those trees that was planted from those little twigs in the pail. That was August 2023. So our goal was 1.5 meters in a year, and we hit it in about 3 months. Because the plants love the gypsum. For them, it's nutrients, right? In the fertilizer process, and from a regulator perspective, they consider it a byproduct of the fertilizer process. But within that gypstack, there's all kinds of nutrients for plants, nitrogens, phosphates, all kinds of things. And so the plants get in there and they're like, woo, this is great. And you get this kind of growth. So it's pretty amazing. So we're looking forward to this spring and summer where it's pretty dry because we haven't got much snow this winter, not a lot of precipitation. But from this aerial shot too, you can actually see that hatch pattern that we talked about. So there's that grid where we lay it out. You can see it. It's quite obvious there. So today, instead of 4 gypstacks and several ponds, we've got these beautiful forests that attracts wildlife. Coyotes, which of course are predators, so they do cause some issues, but we've got families of deer. Our falcons come back and nest every year. It's just a beautiful, peaceful oasis that's just a few hundred meters from the plant. And if you have the opportunity, you are all welcome at any time to come out and walk around and have a look. I do recommend spring or summer. It's a little bleak right now, but it's a totally different world out there. So, and that's all I had for the slides. I wasn't keeping track at the time, but I see the mic's lighting up.
You're right on time.
Oh, perfect. Okay.
Okay, well, thank you very much for the presentation, and I'll see if anyone has any questions. And
Yeah,
yes,
please. I might have to turn the mic over to
we do. So,
Mayor Couture, did you have a question?
Oh,
sure.
she has to turn this
I have
on.
to do it.
She gets to do committee of the whole. So I want to thank you very much for coming out. I saw a little portion of this presentation at Life in the Heartland. I was so impressed because we talk about ESG all the time and in Edmonton Metro, and I don't think sometimes people understand the steps that are being made. So I guess really the question that I have is, how can we get more of this out? Because how many trees in total have been populated now? And, I guess what can we do to make sure that this is getting out? Because this is huge what you're doing.
Well, thank you, Mayor. And I agree with you. I think more events like this, and we do participate in Life in the Heartland. We do go to those trade show things, but it's a good challenge question to take away. And how do we get better at this?
Number of trees.
Can Connie key her mic here? Is that?
Yep. If you just push the red button.
There we go.
So I guess in total it'd be 44,000 plus 26,000, so 70,000 trees.
Wow. 70,000?
Yeah. So the predominant tree is a hybrid poplar, a clone called Okanese, which is drought tolerant and bred to grow very, very quickly. It has no fluff, which was a key point for our operations guys. They didn't want any, clouds of fluff blowing around. About year 6, the Canadian Forest Service planted an understory of white spruce. So the idea is that when those poplars eventually, they're not a very long-lived tree, when they start to decline, the spruce will come up and produce the spruce forest in the 150 year range. So because there are so many deer, they have destroyed a lot of the trees too, so we have to replant sometimes, and a lot of the rodents with girdling of the young trees too. But I planted probably 1,000 Saskatoons and the deer ate them all. So,
wow. Second question that I have: as your property goes towards Turner Campground, and I know it's fenced off, and then you turned a portion of that over, but the trees that are in that area, you don't repopulate those. They just regrow on their own.
We haven't been, if I can get back to that slide. No, we haven't been in the green space. They just do their thing. So these ones that were planted are all on the other end of the property, on those gypstacks, yeah.
Okay, but I was just checking. So everything that's towards the campground,
yeah.
If there was trees there, they're there. And if they weren't there in the past, they just repopulate themselves.
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I just want to say thank you for this presentation. I want to make sure that Edmonton Metro gets a copy of this, because it's what we talk about all the time about what are we doing for environment, and with our industry especially. I think it's something that we need to get that word out to them more. So thank you.
Yeah, so we'd be happy to. See a lot of flashing lights up there.
Yes. We have a full slate here.
Yes.
Next, we have Councillor Harris.
Thank you. That was a good presentation. It's a good news story. So effectively what you've taken is an environmental liability and you're moving it into something that ultimately is positive for the environment. You will, I would imagine, continue to have this being a restricted area for a lot of different reasons. I can imagine it won't be public domain. It's just something that you will maintain in a fence context ad infinitum.
Yeah, well, I mean, unfortunately, there are security, not concerns, but security things you have to consider, right, in the operation of the plant. So yeah, they won't be public access, but it does look a lot nicer than those big white piles of gyp that used to be there. So
yeah, when we look at it from a public access standpoint, parkland, obviously there's a fairly significant cost to maintain it. We obviously wouldn't want to be inheriting any of these sorts of things for a lot of different reasons, I can imagine. But it's good to know that we have green space, albeit in this case, it's limited access green space.
Yeah.
From that standpoint. So none of these lands could be regenerated for future heavy industrial development in some context, could they? Because ultimately, we are obviously promoting this region for heavy industrial development, petrochemical industry primarily. So this is effectively reclaimed.
Yeah.
That's the way it will sit.
Well, I mean, I don't know if you've got any thoughts, Connie. I mean, I don't see why it couldn't be, but I mean, that's just my opinion. It's land. Sure, we've done some work on it. We could always repurpose it. I think I don't think that's ever out of the question.
So that's a corporate decision that the board would have to make.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yes, fundamentally.
Yeah, I won't belabor the point. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you.
And next we have Councillor Abatoye.
Oh. Hello.
Hi, thank you so much for your presentation. And you definitely have bragging rights. 40 years isn't something that's small. So really appreciate your presentation and kudos to the work you're doing in our environment. But to my question, how does the company envisage the long-term sustainability of this initiative?
Sorry, did you get that? I think you broke up on us a little bit. Can you repeat that?
Oh, my apologies. Okay, I'm going to repeat the question. I was saying that in terms of the reclamation projects, what is the long-term sustainability? Like, how do you plan to ensure that, this initiative continues to be sustainable? Is there a plan to continue to expand this reclamation project? Is there a plan to, do some further collaboration, with other industries, for example? Like, what's the long-term plan, essentially?
Okay. Do you?
I don't.
No ideas?
No.
Okay. Well, I think there's kind of two parts to that. So as far as the opportunities on our specific site go, I think we've kind of pushed the limit to where we're going to get to. Reclamation project kind of by default requires something to reclaim. So while we're still in operation, I think we've kind of reached our limit of reclamation ability right now. But I know, Connie, you've had some discussions with some of our industry neighbors, right, who have some opportunities, let's call it some land or some liabilities or whatever you want to call it, on their sites that have come over and looked at our model, your model of the tree planting.
Yeah.
So those connections do happen through various, I can't even remember all of the organizations that we're a member of now. But
yeah, so we tour our facility quite a bit, and I make presentations to reclamation groups in Alberta. I've toured Dow, Sherritt, and some of the other companies that are in the industrial heartland to show them what the possibilities are of using afforestation to kind of clean up and improve contaminated land. So,
yeah.
Well, that's excellent, and thank you for sharing that. My second and final question is just, like, I understand that it's closed off from the public, but I wonder, though, if there could be any concerns that might be related to the residents and if there's been any sort of engagements with the local community.
Well, I think you cut out a little bit again. Sorry.
Okay, I can repeat my question. Do you want me
Sure,
to repeat my
please.
question?
Sure. Yes.
Okay, excellent. Now, saying that, I know that these sites is closed off from public access, but I wondered if there could be any concerns that might be related to the local residents or the local community, especially saying that you are backing up to the Turner Park. Has there been any sort of engagement with the local community for sort of like transparency or to address any concerns that may come out of that?
Yeah. You want to go? Oh, okay. So just recently, Sheena Fitzpatrick has been chairing the Regional Advisory Community Panel. That's something that all the industrial sites used to run on their own, but it sort of fell away with COVID and some other things. So that's one method where we have interaction directly with community members. So there's industry representation, there's community members that are there, and I that's about all I can explain about it. I'm not sure, who gets invited or how people get on the committee, but I mean, if anybody's interested, I can track that down. So that's one way that we talk to the neighbors. But most of our neighbors out here, to be honest, probably have my phone number. I talk to quite a few of them quite frequently. But you're right. I mean, operating a facility that close to a residential neighborhood, I mean, there's a lot of things that we do every day and a lot of things that we need to plan for because of our proximity. We're 800 meters away from the nearest residential neighborhood, and we're well aware of that. So we try to keep our neighbors informed through various methods, and our CARE does a great job of educating the community about shelter in place and the industries in the neighborhood, and what their plans are for things like emergency response. But I hope I answered your question.
No, you totally did. Well, thank you
Okay, thank
for your
you.
response. Really appreciate what you're doing. I think it's to be celebrated. But I think it's also important for us to be, looking out for the local community as well. So I appreciate your response. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Okay, next we have Councillor Macon.
Thank you.
Hi.
Most of my questions have been answered. Actually, all of them have been answered by now. So I guess I'll just say it was really appreciated having this presentation today and understanding the successes that you've had with reclamation, and appreciate the comments that you made about connecting with other industry partners and sharing that knowledge. So yeah, thank you for coming. This was excellent.
No, thank you so much. Thank you.
All right, and next we have Councillor Nguyen.
Yeah, I'll echo a lot of the comments made here already. It's great to see you here today, and certainly I learned that gypsum was a nutrient for tree growing. It's excellent to see these huge forests. Do you have any plans to have like school classrooms, university classes, kind of come see what's going on there? I'm sure there'd be a lot of curiosity in that department in science programs and whatnot.
Yeah, no, it's. I used to teach university, and I still give at least one guest lecture every year to their senior land reclamation people. They used to come out and tour both the Redwater and the Fort Saskatchewan gypsum stacks to see the before and the after. But we do a lot of tours. They're always welcome, but it's a function of how much budget they have on their side. Sometimes the best I can do is take videos and go in there. But yeah, the gypsum basically is crushed up wallboard. But because it's produced as a byproduct of phosphate fertilizer on a ammonia plant, they ended up throwing other goodies in there too. So yeah, you have all your major stuff. So when we mix the soil in, we're going for kind of a 50-50 mix, 50% topsoil and 50% gypsum. And we find once we do that, then we don't have like a barrier, and the tree roots can go, some of them are over 1.5 meters deep. So they're anchored pretty securely in there.
Very interesting. I think definitely part of your success in reclaiming this land is to educate people and be proud of what you do. You actually alluded to my other question, which was, gypsum, gyprock is a drywall that we have, and so driving past those massive Redwater or piles out to Redwater frequently, I thought, why can't that be used for drywall? Because obviously it's all around us in buildings. I think you might have partly answered the question there, but maybe can you expand on that? If there's any other practical uses for this byproduct?
Oh, yeah. And actually, in most countries of the world that generate this gypsum, they reuse it. So almost 100% of it is used for stucco, plaster of Paris, road base, agriculture. We've dabbled with quite a few things with the Redwater gypsum over the years. Most of the current interest is in adding it to composting manure and kind of increasing the nutrient density of a compost. But it can also be used in oil field casing, cement, and roofing tiles, and there are so many things. The problem in North America, my opinion anyway, is that we just don't have enough of an economic or environmental driver. We have a lot of land, we stack it up, but when you get countries in Europe that have no space, they have used it all. So it's a matter of, well, there might be 55 to 60 million tons of gypsum at Redwater, so even if you sold or gave away 50,000 tons a year, there's the logistical problems and you're not making a dent in the pile, so it's possible. And it has potentially very many uses. And in the States now, they're investigating road building in Florida using some of their gypsum. So,
great information. I certainly didn't know any of that. Maybe a future export market here that always will be there, and 2 meters under the ground. Thanks.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Okay, and Councillor Kelly.
Yes, thank you, and thank you, folks, for your presentation.
You're welcome.
Just for information, my history with Sherritt goes back to February of '72 when I got my first job in Fort Saskatchewan, loading trucks with 50-pound fertilizer bags.
Oh,
I'm proud to say that Sherritt put me through university.
nice.
So most of my questions, like the other folks, have been answered. Councillor Harris touched on the accessibility of that area. The trees you talked about, and this was touched on as well with the undergrowth or underplanting of, I think, spruce trees.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Is it your plan to make sure that the entire reclaimed area is planted with a secondary tree that has a much longer lifespan and probably its self-regenerating ability as well?
yes, so the plan is to do this mixed wood afforestation. So there's actually, I call it a cookbook, but the Canadian Forest Service has put together detailed protocol, and it's available on the internet even, how to establish these forests to maximize carbon to combat climate change. So by deliberately planting them on this dense grid, and then with they like to take the long view that if you just sequester carbon for 30 or 40 years, that's not really helping a bunch. So that's why they add the spruce. So we will continue to kind of diversify and mix up the types of trees that we have in there. So it's got a longer term future for sure.
Perfect, thank you. One last question. Decades ago, there was a weeping tile sump pump system run along the bottom portion, the perimeter of the property. Is that still in operation, and do you see a continued need for that even with the reclamation?
109.
I'm guessing
Along 119th Street?
Well, River Road down at the bottom, there was, I think it still exists. I don't know, I haven't been down there now for a few years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's our ground. We have a groundwater intercept system with a series of vertical wells that capture any contaminated plumes of groundwater coming from Sherritt and Agrium and going into the river. So yeah, we're basically sealing off the river from any impacted water. Yeah, it's running. It'll probably run forever.
Still there, yeah.
Okay, super. I misunderstood the concept way back when then. So it's to catch groundwater, not so surface water as opposed to groundwater, essentially.
It'll capture groundwater. The surface water goes to the Sherritt effluent ponds.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Appreciate your work out there. The piles look incredibly better from what they did in 30 years ago, and certainly when I was working at Sheridan, those piles were being added to on a daily basis. So well done, and please keep it up. The community appreciates it for sure.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. And we'd love it if you could come out this summer. We have a giant pumpkin patch as well that we grow on top of the gyp stack. So that's kind of fun.
Is there a way to get a hold of you folks? Because I would like that. I'm familiar with the plant, and I would like to have a visit if possible.
I'm sure there's several people who have our contact information that can help you afterwards.
Perfect.
Might be
You
nice
bet.
to have a
Appreciate it.
council tour.
Yes. Oh,
And
by all
I
means.
agree with Councillor Burgett, actually. So yes, let's try to set something up. Thank you again.
You're welcome.
Okay, we're going to have Mayor Ketcher in a second, but I have a few questions, I guess, too.
Sure.
This is so interesting. It's so impressive. I haven't been out in that area in a few years, and I just remember the big, huge stacks there. So I'm going to take a drive and go look at these trees. So did you level those stacks first, or is it on top? Because I haven't seen them, and it's hard to tell the elevation here. Or is it just that you leveled a little bit, and there's still a pile of gypsum underneath?
Little of both.
Yeah. So we had to move stuff around and contour it. So these gypsum stacks, they start off as having a dike, and then they're an open basin to capture water. So we pushed in the sides and then smoothed it all out so that the runoff would be collected in the ditch. Rather, with gypsum, you don't want low spots where water accumulates because it will eventually dissolve, much like wallboard if it's constantly wet. And so, yeah, it's basically redistributed, smoothed out, surveyed within an inch of its life. And even the most recent project Corey was talking about, that's 17 hectares. And it's all contoured perfectly so that any runoff goes into a ditch that runs along 119th Street.
Okay,
captured.
That's really cool. And then, so long term, is the intent at some point to have it so that's just naturalized, that you guys wouldn't monitor, or is the plan just to constantly always keep an eye on things?
It's hard to say. Like, I think eventually it will be a self-sustaining, like the current forest that was planted in 2017. I mean, I need never go there again. Actually, after 2.5 years, I can't fit a tractor between them anymore. So it's a walk-away scenario in terms of maintenance. But because of its location, nestled in the heavy industrial, I've got Sherrod on one side, I got Dow, I got an ammonia plant. Maybe when those industries eventually fade away, then there will be public access. But for right now, just because of location, I think it has to be kind of kept secure.
Dow does have the wetlands that people can go in though too, right?
Yeah, that's true.
Which is, right there. Okay, I have one more, but Mayor Ketcher is next.
Okay, I just wanted to ask you, with the closure of River Road, benefits, impacts, do you want to just speak to that? Because it's been for a few months now.
Well, again, this is my opinion.
That's fine.
I love it. It's very quiet and peaceful down there. Some of the challenges we had over the years was our employees actually exiting the parking lot, because the speed of other traffic on that road was so fast, and the elevation changes and the curves were such that you couldn't see them coming. We narrowly avoided many accidents out there. Over the years, we actually had to cut down some of our large trees to get a little better viewpoint from the road as it faded away towards Ross Creek. So for us, and from a security standpoint, which is another part of my portfolio, it just takes a whole bunch of stress off when you don't have, all that traffic down there, because there was lots, and there was, I suspect, some things going on down there that were a little untoward at times. There were usually some scars in the morning that you could see in the pavement here and there. So for me, in my opinion, it's great. Our employees love it because we've now got what we've gained, and the collective we, have gained a mile of walking trail that connects from the Lions Campground to the little trail by our entrance that goes out to 119th Street. So my employees are out there at lunchtime, coffee break, all the time, utilizing the trail. From my office, I've got a bird's eye view, and I see people walking dogs and biking and just out there enjoying it. So I know there's probably a few commuters that are unhappy about it, but I think it's a big win. Really, I do.
Great.
That's my opinion.
Thank you. I think it's important to do the follow up and hear and understand the benefits, or if there's any other impacts. So
Yeah.
Great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So I just have one more. So is gypsum still then being produced a lot? Or are we getting new stacks somewhere? And if not, what's happening with it?
So Redwater was the last phosphate plant in Canada, and they shut her down in 2017. 2017.
Yeah.
So is currently no gypsum being produced in Canada. There are 4 stacks in Alberta. There's one in Medicine Hat. There's a very large one in Calgary right off the Deerfoot. We have these in Fort Saskatchewan, and there's the big pile at Redwater. But there's also stacks in Ontario. New Brunswick used to dump it into the ocean, so there's no stacks there. So anywhere in the world that they still produce phosphate fertilizer is still generating gypsum. Some countries stack it up. Other countries, like Morocco, just dump it into the Atlantic Ocean. So Florida probably has the largest accumulation of gypsum in the world, over 1 billion tons. So if you drive an hour south of Disney World and you look around, there will be stacks 300 feet high up and down Phosphate Alley. So it's quite something to see.
So what are people using then instead of phosphates for fertilizer?
We just stopped production because of economics.
Oh.
So Morocco and the Middle East has most of the world's phosphate rock resources, and some think that Morocco will own probably 100% of the phosphate rock within the next 50, 75 years. So they will monopolize the world's phosphate fertilizer supply. And we have very limited resources in Canada, and in the United States, they've mined it all. So there's nothing very good left.
Okay.
So.
Okay, I see no further questions. Thank you both very much for coming out for a wonderful presentation, and I look forward to having a tour sometime.
Excellent. You're very welcome. We'd love to have you out there.
You bet.
And
Thank you
you're
very
welcome to
much.
stay if you want, but don't feel obligated. You're also welcome to leave.
Thank
Awesome.
you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, we have another presentation. This one is from the River Valley Alliance, and we have Christine Archibald, the Executive Director, coming up for you have about 20 minutes. And I see you, if you want to introduce them, I'll let you do that. Introduce your assistants that are coming with you.
Thank you very much for allowing us to give a little update presentation on the work of the River Valley Alliance here this afternoon. Joining me today are Marianne Woodman to my left and John McMillan to my right. They are the council-appointed designates to our Community Engagement Committee, and I'll talk a little bit about more their work later in the presentation. So I just want to jump right in. I'll just give a little overview. I know all of you, I'm pretty sure, are well aware of who we are and what we do. I'll talk a little bit of about our strategic priorities, closing that 25-kilometer gap in the Southwest, and some steps that we're taking toward fund development. So who is the RVA? I know you know we're a not-for-profit. We're also a registered charity. We can take donations from anyone and everyone and give a charitable tax receipt. We have our wonderful 6 municipal shareholders, Fort Saskatchewan being one of them. Municipal councillors appointed to our board. Currently, we have Councillor Blizzard as our appointee. Councillor Nguyen stepped off last year, and our previous councillor was Councillor Harris. So we're well known with this council, so that's fantastic. So what do? We coordinate the planning, funding, and connection of what I like to say, and people get tired of me saying it, but I say it anyway, North America's longest river valley pedestrian trail, 100 kilometers long through its largest river valley park system, more than 8,000 hectares. This is our current board of directors. So you see the council appointees at the top. We have 2 from the city of Edmonton just because of their sheer size. And then the bottom row is our directors at large. They are vetted from the community based on different skills and backgrounds that they bring, their knowledge. They are all volunteers. So we're very, very appreciative of their time. So this is our guiding document. It is the plan of action. It was written in 2007. It took about 2 years and $1 million to write. There's a lot of planning that went into it. It is a 3-phase blueprint. We're currently coming to the end of phase 1. There are scheduled to be 2 additional phases, but we only had funding for phase 1. So we're working all of the time to advocate for that additional funding for phase 2. Current funding model is so important to what we do. It's a 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 funding model. So the municipalities contribute 1/3 of each project within their borders. The provincial grant covers 1/3 and our federal grant covers 1/3. We didn't determine the projects. They were done in consultation with each municipality and depending on what their priorities were in collaboration with their own overall visions for their park systems. So what are some benefits of RVA mission? We speak to a lot of what governments are talking about these days: increased accessibility to parks and trails, increased active transportation routes, of course, lessening those carbon emissions. We all talk about that. Increased economic diversity and job creation. Now, because this is a destination in and of itself, being the longest river valley trail in North America, it's beginning to gain some really great national recognition and even international recognition. We're trying to work with Travel Alberta and also Alberta Parks and Alberta Tourism. Increased protection of green spaces and wildlife corridors, increased cultural awareness through our unifying trail name, which is what I'm going to speak a lot about today, increased community connections, of course, and all of those lead to increased quality of life. I just want to let you know that this year we were nominated for an award for creating a sustainable tourism destination. What is a sustainable tourism destination? It's a tourist attraction that gives as much to residents as it does to visitors while balancing the protection of natural spaces. So we really speak to a lot of what's going on in the world and in government priorities today. So I just want to give kudos to each of our municipalities, because without your vision, the RVA wouldn't exist in the first place. So congratulations on the award. Our strategic plan for the next 2 years is incorporating the trail name on signs and wayfinding symbols, completing our phase 1 projects, of course increasing that government and community support to get additional funding to complete phase 2. So the unifying trail name. In 2023, last year, after 2 years of engagement with the elders and knowledge keepers, we did come to our unifying trail name, which is Miskwichi Meskinau. That translates to Beaver Hill Road in English. That name was gifted to us by Elder Jerry Saddleback. This name was used for centuries by primarily Cree people to refer to the trade and medicinal plant gathering route along the North Saskatchewan River. It came through verbal communication with Elder Jerry Saddleback's ancestors and his nation, and it was almost lost, actually, over years. It was buried. After some storytelling, we came to learn of it, and it became, it just spoke to what we were doing. So that's why it was adopted. In May, we announced the trail name at a public ceremony. Mayor Sohi's there, wearing the medallion with the trail symbol on it. This was created by a Cree artist, and each municipality received one, so I hope you have one in your office somewhere. I do have a video that I wanted to share with you. It only is a few minutes long, and if I can just click out of here. Okay, thanks.
We Nehiyawak are the nomadic people. We were able to travel this whole island like it was our living room. We had specific routes for each kind of journey. Through the many different intricate pathways that we had, we were able to develop a mental map. We called them Meskanawa, the many intricate pathways. All those trails are a part of the longer story. Our treaty with all indigenous groups of the hemisphere was based on one single principle. And that principle was the Creator made everything perfect. Let's leave it as is. We're absolute one with the earth. Physical, mental, spiritual, and emotional balance. Mother Earth is a living deity, and that's how we have treated her since time immemorial. We always came back to the Treaty 6 area, which was our sanctuary, where life started with us in the balance of winter and summer. Each individual trip we made had a name for it. One such trip was Agineskamwin, which was a trip to pick all of the medicines throughout the entire island of North Central and South America. The trail is Amsquatchilmeskano, as it was known to pre-contact time. The trail began as the Sacred Beaver Hill. It was named because of the dam on the river. Amisk is the beaver himself. Meskano translates to the Holy Sacred Road. It is a kind and compassionate trail. We had certain types of ceremonies that took place in this sacred trail. The flats below was a sanctuary of the sacred holy ceremony of trade for thousands and thousands of years. There were gifts of many different resources of nations of people throughout the hemisphere that shared these rich resources. Whenever the chiefs and the people within the reservation wanted goods immediately, then we would have the runners available to be able to cater to people. The runners usually required 3 pairs of moccasins to make that run. Despite of the conquistador mentality of the newcomers, we were still able to continue our compassionate way of lifestyle with other nations of people. Our elders often tell us the foremost attribute and characteristic that a person can ever possess on the face of this earth is kindness and compassion itself.
Back into my presentation here. I think I can go into PowerPoint mode. So with that trail name are coming some markers and some symbols. So this is our interpretive trailhead sign. Now this is actually an older version. There is a newer version to this one that I just got in my office late last week. So the PowerPoint was already sent off to you. I couldn't change it. There's a little bit of extra color added at the top, a banner. The symbol itself isn't just sort of a beaver floating up there. It actually has a circle around it that I'll show you on the next slide. The content was given to us by Elder Saddleback and by Hunter Cardinal, who was our consultant during the consultation process, and it is being interpreted into Cree. So it will appear on the signs in English and in Cree just to honor the original language. We have worked with administration from each of our municipalities to determine the best place for this interpretive sign. So likely it will be in West River's Edge Park somewhere here in Fort Saskatchewan. But marking and wayfinding is really important to the people out on the trail. So this is our wayfinding symbol. This was created by a Dene Métis artist in Edmonton. His name is Matthew Weigel. He's also an author. He's won many, many awards for his work. This symbol will be probably at every location where you could veer off the primary trail that we consider in Mskwachi-Meskinow. So this will help people find their way if they wanted to start at the beginning or midpoint, and lead them to where they wanted to end up. Oops. Okay, so I just want to talk a little bit about where all of our money has gone that we received from our original grants. It was about $110 million all in. $5 million at least was spent here in Fort Saskatchewan on Riverside Nature Trail, the West River's Edge Pavilion, and the Highway 15 pedestrian bridge and trail that we just opened last year. So this is where you can see where the funds have been designated to. So this was our wonderful Highway 15 pedestrian bridge grand opening. Thank you to Mayor Ketcher and to Councillors Nguyen and Harris for attending. It was a really beautiful day in July, and it was really well received. I hope that residents here in the area have had a lot of positive things to say about that new footbridge. There's a great picture from Alberco of the whole bridge. And this is the new bridge. So this will be the remainder of our Phase 1 funds. This is the project that we're concentrating on right now. It gives us a lot of connectivity. The Edmonton to Strathcona County pedestrian bridge, which will, of course, will also connect to the currently existing Riverside Nature Trail that flows from Strathcona County into Fort Saskatchewan. So this will help your residents as well if they wanted to go further south. This is what it will look like. It has a slight S-curve because of infrastructure in the water that we had to go around. So it's well underway. It began this past summer. It's slated to be completed in late 2025, open to the public in early 2026. The side that you're looking at right here with the turnaround is on the Strathcona County side. Strathcona County has big plans for this area. They're creating a large regional park with some of additional funding that they got outside of the RVA's funding. This is what it currently looks like, or what it looked like in January. Actually, this is the piers are now actually complete. They poured concrete. The good weather has really helped the construction move along really quickly with no breaks needed. So they're well underway, and they're currently on timeline. So what are we talking about for Phase 2? Of course, our primary priority project is that 25-kilometer gap. The trail currently ends at the West Anthony Henday Bridge in Edmonton, and it begins again just outside of Devon with trails all the way from Sturgeon County through to Devon, Parkland County complete for the most part. We do need a small, fairly, I'm going to say inexpensive when it comes to pedestrian bridges, connecting Parkland County and Devon trails, about $18 million. But either way, the Highway 60 bridge connection is already there. There is a pedestrian portion on that bridge, although it's fairly old and it's not the best, but it is accessible that way. So this is what we're concentrating on in our advocacy efforts. This is, it's been divided into 4 segments. Each one is around between 5 and 8 to 9 kilometers in length. We're currently attacking segment 1. There is only one private landowner in that area that we need to either get a right-of-way for or purchase property. That land is actually currently for sale. So we've been speaking with the landowner and some potential funding partners to help put some money toward securing that land. Our innovating funding model continues. We do access or try to access a lot of different grants. We always have our eye on what's coming up, so to get more public funding. But we're also looking at community funding now. We do have grants or gifts that do not include public funds. Kira Energy here from actually the Fort Saskatchewan area gave us a large grant that covered all of our trail naming costs. So that was really appreciative and wonderful. And we are a registered charity. We're able to, provide those tax receipts, or with Kiera, they all they really wanted was a recognition plaque along the trail, which we were able to give to them. And then our Community Engagement Committee, I just wanted to give kudos to the appointees from Fort Saskatchewan. They're super engaged. They help us with our monthly walks that we host every month, well, obviously month, but these are throughout the 6 municipalities. The top picture is our walk that what happened when we opened the Highway 15 bridge. We're usually able to accommodate between 30 and 50 people at the most on these walks. They always sell out the first or second day. They're free, but we do have a sign up, and it's always sold out within 1 or 2 days. They're hugely popular. We look to our Community Engagement Committee to set up a speaker for each walk so that it's a guided walk. We talk about the history of the region, or the plants, the flora, the fauna, a lot of different things that the community is interested in. So those happen monthly throughout the communities. And there's lots of ways to connect with us if you want more information, and I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you for the presentation, and I am happy to be on the committee. And we have some questions I see already, so we'll start with Councillor Harris.
We're glad that you are on the board, Councillor Blizzard, and as an alternate, you're doing a great job too. Anyways, the question I've got is, I note in your one capital project candidates for phase 2, what is the Gersick Temple Trail? I don't recall ever hearing about that one when I was on the board.
Yeah, so that is across the river in Sturgeon County. There is the large Gersick Temple. I think it's quite obvious. I think it's on Highway 15. So they own the lands that go right along the river. And so that is not primary trail, it's secondary trail. And Sturgeon County is really developing their trail system right now. They're looking forward into the future as to what other secondary trail they can connect. So they're working with Trans-Canada Trail and Alberta TrailNet and some of the northern municipalities to further Athabasca Landing Trail, and also then towards the south of that on the other side of the river from Fort Saskatchewan would be the Gersick Temple Trail, and that would connect up to Athabasca Landing Trail on that side as well. So it was never really a priority project for the RVA because it is secondary trail, which is not less important, but it's, primary trail is what we're focusing on with our limited time and money. And so that is what the Gersick Temple Trail is.
So that trail will run on the other side of the river.
Yes.
In Sturgeon County.
Yeah.
Where will it start? Obviously, you're talking about connecting in, obviously, where the underslung is right now, which ultimately goes up into the Athabasca area. But does it just go from there along that, whatever the road is in Sturgeon County, and wind its way through that? Or is that what is envisioned in terms of secondary trail?
Yeah, the secondary trail is actually all the way on the other side of the river, all the way to the south. So there is, if you look at our plan of action, it's interesting because it's changed over the years. Depending on which municipality you're in, you flip back and forth across the river, and that's why all of the pedestrian bridges. But in order to make the connection for that secondary trail, that was the portion that was in the northeast quadrant. Okay. Yeah.
Thanks a lot. The second question, obviously I like to kayak on the river, and with the construction of the bridge, obviously where I would normally launch to get that nice run into Fort Saskatchewan has been closed off. So you're saying that Strathcona County is planning a regional park at that location. Will they have amenities for river access and boat launching, that sort of thing?
That is the plan. That's in their plan. So that is outside the RVA's work, but I've seen what their plans are. And yes, there's a boat launch. There's washrooms on that side of the river. There's a lot of native plantings. There's an indigenous component to it as some ceremonial ground, as well as a playground, perhaps a splash park. They have, day use areas. So yes, to answer your question, there will be a boat launch.
Okay, so that's incidental to the work of the RVA, but it ultimately is still going to be a point of interest on the trail. So that's good. Good to hear. So that would be on their website, I would imagine.
Yes, I would imagine it is.
Good, thanks.
You're welcome.
Oh, thank you. Next we have Mayor Ketcher.
Great, thank you. And I don't really have a question. I just want to pass on. I was at Pioneer House on Thursday for their lunch, and there was some seniors there that I think it was that event. I was at a few things. Anyway, there was some ladies there that live in Lamoureux, and they said they walk over to the underslung just about every day. That's part of their walking habit, and they just love it. And they continue to thank everybody who was involved in making that happen. So just
Thank you.
passing on it is well used. Thank you.
That's wonderful to hear. Thank you.
Okay, not seeing anyone else. I'm just going to say I did walk to the bridge, the underslung. It's really impressive. And I like some of the, I don't know what you call them, symbols, the artwork that's in there. I took some pictures. It's really nice. And I was at the groundbreaking of the new pedestrian bridge, and I'm looking forward to that being done so that we can cross the river. I've walked some of the trail, but my goal is to walk more, but I haven't been there. Thanks for all that you do, and thanks to John and Marianne for being on the Community Engagement Committee, and we'll see you out on the trails.
Thank you
and
very
at a
much.
meeting.
Thank you. Have a great day.
And you're welcome to stay for the rest of the meeting if you like, or you may leave. And I think, should we have a comfort break? Yeah, we'll take a 5-minute comfort break until 3:15. Let's make it. Okay, it's 3:15. I'll call this meeting back to order. And our next order of business is the Neighborhood Rehabilitation Report by Grant Schaefer. Welcome.
Thank you. My name is Grant Schaefer. I'm Director of Fleet Facilities Engineering. I'm here today to present the Neighborhood Rehabilitation Report. The development of a neighborhood rehabilitation plan was approved during the 2022 budget deliberations. As the plan was developed, it was broken down into three components. The first was a decision matrix to help prioritize projects. The second was a 10-year plan showing a potential program based on current funding levels within the current approved 10-year plan, and as well a long-term replacement plan to help establish long-term funding of the program. The decision matrix ranks projects by road segment against each other to help establish priorities within the program. It uses condition assessments, available capacity, and pipe size to assign scores for each pipe and road segment. We did find that we have a number of gaps within our data when it comes to condition assessment. However, over time, through our existing inspection programs, these gaps will be filled and they'll help reprioritize the matrix and projects. It's also important to note that the results need interpretation, as many of the areas are done by partial block. So in order to create a project, we kind of have to add the adjacent segments so it reprioritizes it a little bit as we go. The 10-year capital plan was based on the results of the decision matrix and the current funding levels in the approved 10-year plan. This plan will be updated and adjusted to reflect any changes to funding levels and to reflect the combining of segments to create complete projects. As the decision matrix updated and budgets are also potentially adjusted, the 10-year plan will be reworked to match this new data. Unsurprisingly to us, the plan focuses on the Old Fort areas and works its way into the Sheridan neighborhoods. The final portion of the plan looked at the long-term life cycle replacement of existing infrastructure. The current infrastructure replacement cost is approximately $1.2 billion in today's money. So that is, if we wanted to replace it all, that would be today. That's how much we would need. The chart and graph on the screen show the infrastructure value in today's dollars by decade of installation. So how much money was spent each decade as it was put in the ground. This shows spikes in development over the years, with the first spike occurring in what was installed in the 1970s with the development of Pine View and the Sheridan Extension. The data we have shows that the first servicing was installed in the 1950s. So a 75-year life cycle would have that replacement cycle beginning in about 2025. Over the past 20 years or more, the city's been slowly working through neighborhood rehabilitation projects. These projects primarily focused on segments that were deteriorating quicker than anticipated or had other issues that were causing maintenance concerns. The data from the report was used to develop a funding plan. So Appendix B of the council report, we developed three different life cycle scenarios. The first looked strictly at the 75-year life cycle taken directly from the consultant report. In this scenario, the annual contribution to establish a fully funded program would need to average approximately $16.5 million. This assumes that all materials in the ground have a 75-year life cycle. With the move away from concrete, clay, and cast iron materials in the late 1980s and switching to PVC, the expected life cycle of newer infrastructure is estimated at about 100 years. This means that the entire program could be considered a 100-year life cycle, with the first portion needing replacement starting at the 75-year mark. By changing the life cycle to 100 years, the annual contribution is $12.4 million, as shown on the charts on the screen. Between 2006 and 2018, the city funded a sewer reline program within the Pine View and Sheridan neighborhoods. This program installed a liner within the sewer pipes to protect them from continued root intrusion and deterioration. This work is expected to increase the life cycle of these pipes to approximately 90 years. This is what's shown in the third scenario in Appendix B. While the overall average program contribution remains the same, it smooths out the spike in the annual required spend, which was starting in 2045. This third scenario was used to develop a preliminary funding model for the program, which is found in Appendix C of the Council report. The funding model looks out over the 100-year life cycle of the program, and again, referencing that third spending scenario. Within the appendix, there's a couple of sheets of spreadsheets. The big spreadsheet was the full 100-year program. Very tough to read. It's very small. I understand that. A little bit more zoomed in version, which kind of give a little bit more detail to 40 years, where I think you could almost, or at least I could almost read the numbers. So in developing the model, a number of assumptions were made. One is that the average inflation rate for the next 100 years will be 2.5%. This is based on current Bank of Canada policy rates of 2%. The interest earned on reserve balances will be 0.5% above inflation. And the value of contributed assets will remain close to the average over the past decade at about $16 million, again, adjusted each year for inflation. The chart on the screen, and that we included in Appendix C, attempts to visually explain the details of the funding program. The reserve balance is shown in the shaded gray in the background. The solid red line is the required annual spend based on the Appendix C third scenario. And then the dashed black line is the average annual requirement, which is $12.5 million in today's dollars, with inflation added every year. And the bars represent the planned contribution to the program. So the model assumes contribution rates will increase each year by the inflation on the average annual requirement, which is the $12.5 million, plus growth equal to 1% of the average value of contributed assets. This does equate to about a 1% tax increase per year for the program. So in actual dollars, the current 10-year capital program, or capital plan, has approximately a $340,000 tax increase planned for 2025 and beyond. The proposed model would change the annual increase in 2025 to approximately $475,000, so about a $135,000 increase, with this increase reaching $550,000 by year 5. So as shown on the chart, for the first 8 years of the model, the program is underfunded, and this would create an infrastructure deficit. This deficit's eliminated over the following 5 years, with surpluses funding then going back into the reserve. So this deficit would add some risk as the infrastructure is potentially being extended beyond its life cycle. However, work undertaken over the past 20 years has concentrated on areas of concern, while any remaining issues can be addressed in the earlier years of the program. In 2045, the first spike in the program occurs, with funds being drawn down at that point from the reserve as the Pineview and Sharon Extension neighborhoods begin their rehabilitation. While the reserve balance does fluctuate over time, it remains a positive balance going forward, actually, through the whole 100-year program. With that, I know it's a technical report, but I'll be happy to answer any questions.
All right, thank you very much for your report. Are there any questions by any council? Yes, we have some questions. We'll start with Mayor Gail Katcher.
Okay, thank you. So the question that I have, you talk about 1% a year. So is this weaning us off the MSI or the LGFF funding, which frees that up for other projects?
Your Worship, at this point, this program is no longer funded by MSI or LGFF, I guess the new...
Overfunded?
It's no longer funded. Over the last number of years, we've taken the funding out of that, from that program, out of this, out of the neighborhood rehab program.
Okay, so then taking that out, but then, so the 1% per year, and that would be accumulated, I would anticipate, so 1% this year, and then 1% each year?
That's correct.
Okay. I'll save my comments for when it's in comment time, not here. Okay, thanks.
Councillor Harris.
Question. Obviously, the developers over time have contributed assets to the city, which we have taken over, and then it becomes our responsibility and I guess liability. Is there any opportunity for any sort of levies to be collected from development as it takes place that ultimately can be contributed into the reserves that we've got? I'm not suggesting that is something, but I'm just curious. Is there any sort of an opportunity for that, so that the developers make the investment, they sell the investment, they profit from the investment, and then we ultimately inherit the responsibility? But is there some way to retire that from some contribution from the developers as a go-forward responsibility?
I don't believe there is. I think that you could, within certain areas, potential to do like a community redevelopment levy, but that's more of a reinvesting back into the neighborhood to uplift it, not necessarily into a real rehabilitation program. I don't believe there's a mechanism allowed that would let us do that.
And my second question is, I didn't see the term net present value in here at all. I'm just kidding. Thank you.
Thank you. And Councillor Kelly is next.
Yes, and thank you. I just have to respond quickly to Councillor Harris. You didn't see it because all the numbers you're given are in $23. Absolutely, if we were to factor in inflation, you would see dramatically higher numbers. So we'll leave it at that. Grant, first I want to thank you for getting this work done. I have always thought that it's critical to understand what our liability is. The report, I believe, made good sense, and I like your analysis. But I'd like to just maybe summarize, if possible, a couple of your comments. So page 12 of the report, which is page 81 on my computer or on my iPad, for those that are following, there's table 3.2, the 10-year capital plan funding. So I think you said it's about a 1% hit on the property tax cost per annum. And I think you're probably correct, but I just wanted, for the record, to highlight the actual cost increases. So in our funding through taxes for year 23 is 4.3 million. It's forecast in this chart that the funding through taxes for the year 2033, 10 years down the road, will be close to 7.8 million, or more than a 70% increase. Is my understanding correct?
That's correct. This is what is actually in the current 10-year capital plan, that funding model that's shown in this chart.
Okay, thank you. Are these numbers then going to hold based on your study? Given that you've put them in here, I assume that they will, but I'd like your comment.
No, we're going to adjust these numbers going forward. Is the plan to put within the new 10-year plan to match the funding scenario that we've come up with. I'm trying to find the right. It's within the Appendix C, I believe.
Hey, let me find it while you're looking for it as well.
It would be.
Can you point me to what you're referring to, Grant?
Appendix B of the council report, which has the 3 different funding scenarios, kind of gives the high level. And that's what we would be working towards. But within the big spreadsheets of Appendix C, the first 40-year one, you can read, actually see what the annual contribution we're proposing might be.
I don't have it in front of me. So just, again, for video purposes, the proposal will show an increase over what we currently have in the 10-year capital plan?
That's correct, yes.
And roughly, quick answer, how much per annum or how much in total of an increase are we looking at?
It is about the first it starts at 475,000 per year and grows to 550,000 per year over that 10-year span as an increase.
That's over and that is the increase over and above the increase that's already built into the 10-year capital plan.
No, it's instead of the increase built into the 10-year plan. It's about $150,000 a year per increase over the current plan.
Okay, thank you. That's what I was looking for. I've got more questions, but that's good for now. Thank you. I'll come back in.
Okay, next we have Councillor Abatoye.
Thank you, Grant. Thank you for your presentation. My question is about, so every year in our 10-year capital plan, there's two-line budgets that keep repeating themselves. So the neighborhood rehabilitation and the local road rehabilitation. And when I was reading the report, it says that the decision matrix included our roadways. So I'm just wondering, so this, the numbers that's been provided only refers to the neighborhood rehabilitation and the local road rehabilitation. And why is that? What's the life cycle of roads? Is that, I just wanted to shed a little more light on the two of them. Thank you.
So the neighborhood rehab is a report. We're looking at a 100-year life cycle for the underground infrastructure. And when we do that work, we also replace the surface, which is your roads and sidewalks, curb and gutter. The local road rehab just looks at basically the asphalt surface and in some cases the base if that fails. That's on a local road. It's about a 40-year life cycle, so it'll get done twice within the time of the neighborhood rehab. On more major roads, it can be as short as 15 years, 10 years on the highway. So it depends on the roadways.
So that's completely separate from this project we're looking at, right?
It is separate, though we do want to take it into account because we want to make sure that we're not digging up a sewer line on a street that we paved 2 years ago. So we want them to interlink so we know what each hand is doing.
Right. Right. Okay. All right. Thank you very much, Grant. Really appreciate your time on this.
Okay, thank you very much. And next we have Councillor Macon.
Excuse me. I don't have any other questions other than what was asked. I really do appreciate the work that went into this report. I would say it's exactly the product I was hoping that was going to come back to us. I think it outlines the critical information that we need to make a successful plan moving forward, and it provides me a lot of confidence. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, Councillor Nguyen.
Yeah, thanks, Grant. I'm just curious what the budgeted versus actual have been in the last couple of years. Maybe you can give me a general idea of like how we're falling with our budgeting. I think I noticed in the report there's 15% engineering, 15%, I think maybe construction that was accounted for in budgeting. How are we falling? And I know that it's been more inflation than usual lately here.
I'm trying to think the best way to answer this. So the way that the budgets work is we will spend all the money we can that makes a project. So if we have, for example, 2024, we have $4.7 million in the budget. We will attempt to spend all of that to do all the work, but the projects may split it up so I can only spend $3.5 million this year. If that's the case, we carry forward $1.2 million into next year, add it to that budget, and then I can do more work next year where the projects link up to be a bigger project. So in terms of the pressure on the budget, that's definitely been there with inflation and things like that. We still are doing not too bad in terms of keeping up with that. We haven't seen the major price increases on underground work. Surface works are definitely more expensive, but it seems to be the undergrounds are fairly stable, or have been. There hasn't been the big jumps that we've seen in other things. So the budgets themselves kind of just roll forward. They don't, at the end of the year, they don't end. We still getting leftover carries forward to the next year to keep going.
Okay, I actually didn't know some of that information, so thank you.
Okay, and I have a question before we go to round two. So going to the same chart that Councillor Kelly mentioned, table 3.2 10-year capital plan funding estimates. And I don't know if this started before, but for 2024, it looks like we're short 1.5 million almost, where there's no plans to come back and say, hey, we need that? Or is this just a chart saying we should have had more?
It's probably more a chart of we should have. It's not we're going to come back. We have the 4.7, and that's what we're going to work within.
Okay.
And then we'll catch up as we go.
Okay. And do you find with costs, like we seem to the last couple of years have had quite a jump in some of the products, some of the work being done? Is there less work that we're able to accomplish now with the budgets, or are we look now forward going, these are the higher costs and we're budget for that?
I think I'll start with current year and back. We're probably not doing quite as much. Going forward, these are the 2023 dollars estimates using current prices. So those would be the new base prices going forward, or base budgets.
Okay, thank you very much. And I see Councillor Kelly has some more questions.
Thank you. I'm getting my thoughts organized here. I want to touch back, perhaps, Grant, to what I think, or maybe extend on Councillor Harris's thought around how do we fund this. I feel a little bit chagrined as a resident and a new homeowner, new in the sense that I bought a new home now 15 years ago. And in the purchase price of that new home was the cost of the utility installation for that subdivision to get the utilities that we're referring to here to my house. And that's the same with every other homeowner in Fort Saskatchewan. So the people in West Park, they paid for, when they bought their house new, the first homeowner and subsequent, but certainly the first, paid for those utility installations. And now as a new homeowner, I'm not only on my mortgage paying for the utilities connected to my house, but the utilities being upgraded in the older parts of Fort Saskatchewan. So, to follow up with Councillor Harris, why don't we give some more thought to neighborhood improvement levies so that those that have consumed this utility, this service, are the ones to pay for it directly, or certainly more of it? And that first question, Grant, and I'll toss the second one on and then let you go. Alternatively, have we looked at or considered some formula for capital and debt financing for this so that the ultimate cost gets spread out over maybe the next generation a little heavier than currently happening? Your thoughts on that, please.
Actually went around a few discussions on this with different administrative staff. So I'll try and articulate it the way I best understand it and the way we presented it. So to start, and I'll use your example. If you buy a brand new home, you are absolutely in the price of that lot and the price of that house. You're paying for the infrastructure that services that lot. And then in this program, over time, you're paying for the replacement of it. But at the back end, if you sell that property at any point in time, you're getting reimbursed for that. The cost of the home includes, cost of your sale includes the cost of the infrastructure to service it. So I think it's a fair model that way. You're not at the back end. If I buy the house today and I sell it tomorrow, I don't sell it for less because the infrastructure is depreciated. I still get the full value of that as we move forward. And then building on that, in terms of looking at neighborhood levies or local improvements, the risk there is it really hits a neighborhood hard when you get there. So it's a big expense for those homeowners, and really what it looks at potentially doing that is driving down the cost or the value of those homes as they reach the end of their infrastructure life cycle, because there's this major expense that's coming to the new homeowner or the next homeowner. So I think that generationally this works because the initial investment you recoup when you sell your home at any point along the way. trying to think if there was another question in there that I might have missed. I'm sorry.
Thank you, Grant. Yeah, I was on whether or not we could fund some of this with debt, but I just want to ask you if you considered when you were discussing this and the recoup suggestion that you're having, if you gave consideration to whether you're actually recouping the depreciation or whether you're benefiting from inflation, which of course affects the cost of anything else that happens in the future. And I think maybe there's some confusion in the discussion on that. Any thoughts on that? Is it inflation or is it really a recovery of the utility costs?
I think it's both. To be honest, I think that you get your initial investment, you get that back, and yeah, over time, typically property values will inflate, and you'll bring that back over time. But you don't have, unless the market drops, you have that housing bubble. If the market drops, you don't typically have a point where your house is worth less tomorrow than it was today. So you do get that. That's the inflation side, but the base value always stays there, which includes the infrastructure that services the property. I think it looks like, if you're buying a house and you look at the condition of the shingles and the furnace and things like that, that's your negotiating tactic to maybe bring that price down. You're not looking at the condition of the infrastructure to say, hey, I have this major expense coming. And if we start to do a neighborhood revitalization levy, my feeling is that you would then have your savvy real estate brokers looking at that, the value of that home, that property, and saying that's worth less because in 5 years there's going to be this major cost coming that's going to hit that next homeowner.
And I agree with your comments. But that's precisely the point. Grant, if a councillor was to bring a notice of motion forward asking administration to prepare a report on a neighborhood revitalization levy, for lack of a better term, but we know what we're talking about here, would you be able to handle that, and how long do you think it would take? In other words, what sort of effort do you think would be involved in your department or whatever department getting something like that back to council?
Before I answer that, I'd like to ask a question of you, because I just want to know, because I know a few years ago we were looking at this down to a certain point, and we actually didn't present a council report, but did distribute a report. And if that report is very similar to what you're asking now, then it wouldn't take a lot of work then to update those numbers. If what you're asking for is something different, it would probably take some time, and I don't know if I could put a timeline around it at this point.
And thank you. Good comment, Grant. Yes, council did get a report back from administration, but I think that report could start as a foundation. I guess what I'm looking for at this particular juncture would be to add to that perhaps the technicality around initiating some sort of program like a levy program, and secondly, a more wholesome discussion on whether the market should pay for these improvements, the same as the market pays for the new shingles that you mentioned in your comments, or whether the community should pay for them. So, I think your comment was satisfactory for right now. I'll give it some thought, Grant, and perhaps you and I or Troy can have a chat on it shortly in the future. I appreciate your time. Good job. I like the report, and I'm very pleased that we now have it. So at least we know where we stand and have a starting point. If I might, Councillor Burgett, one more quick question, and then I am done. Grant, did the city obtain ownership of or access to the spreadsheets and the modeling that was put together to build this plan so that future updates will happen fairly routinely, I guess, and consistently in years going forward?
Yes, we have all the spreadsheets.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Kelly. We have Councillor Nguyen.
Yeah, Grant, just wanted to get some clarification, excuse me, on table 6.1, which is under your conclusions and recommendations. It shows the neighborhood rehab funding, which is currently in our 10-year capital plan versus the estimated funding required. And because we're talking about 1% per year per annum needed, how are we supposed to interpret this when you're showing that the funding requirement is actually going down? What am I missing there? I'm just a bit confused about what we're seeing here.
Yeah, I think part of that is I'm trying to wrap my head around it a little bit too. So this looks at the 10-year plan based on a condition rating, I guess, is what it's saying. It's saying that anything, I think as they work through the model and the condition, anything with a 65 or higher needs to be done sooner than later, was the way that the model worked. So that is the funding required. So it doesn't necessarily get all of the infrastructure within the 10 years that you would if you were going out to the full 75-year life cycle. This is the condition-based versus the life cycle-based funding. And so then the requirement, again, we show a deficit, and as I showed on the graph earlier, I think it makes sense to plan for that deficit, but we can build that back up without a lot of risk in terms of infrastructure risk, because typically our infrastructure is in very good shape, and I should knock on wood when I say that. We don't have a lot of issues with it, and where we are having some smaller issues, those are the areas we're hitting first. So I don't think it adds a lot of risk to be able to draw down at a deficit, knowing that we're coming back out at the end of that first 8 years, and within 13 years we're starting to build a reserve to go forward. I don't know if that helps answer or not.
Yeah,
but
it helps. Yeah, it was just the one area in the report that was a little bit gray to me, so I appreciate the answer and the context. Thanks.
Councillor Harris.
So, Grant, is it fair to say that this whole neighborhood revitalization program that we've been pursuing, well, there was little bits back when I was working in the area that you are today, and obviously the area, Lau Avenue, for example, that older area town was some of the worst. But is it fair to say that the municipality assuming this responsibility, ultimately the offset to that is on local improvement levy, where ultimately you have to go out and you have to petition, people have to sign petitions to get their primarily sidewalks and roads redone and things of that nature, which is virtually impossible. And I think the city of Edmonton moved to a neighborhood revitalization program quite some years ago because they wanted to get away from that whole petitioning, challenge, and the fact that it only takes a few neighbors in a neighborhood to refuse to pay for something like that to stymie the whole project. So is this responsibility for a neighborhood revitalization program for the greater public good, so that ultimately we can approach things in a consistent manner in a planned context the way this plan would ultimately suggest?
I believe it is. When you get into local improvement levies, things like that, you run into the problem of it could be challenged and delayed. To your point, I think the city of Edmonton, they still use that, but they use it for when they go into a neighborhood and they're doing a neighborhood rehab, they'll use that for upgrades. So if you wanted upgraded street lighting or you wanted paved alleys, they'll use a local improvement on that. But the base infrastructure, I think, is included within their general program now.
Yeah, so when you buy a piece of property, I guess in answer to Councillor Kelly's point, you're buying a serviced lot. The roads, the sidewalks, the curbs and gutters, the shallow utilities by and large. And so ultimately, if you had a gravel alley and it wasn't paid for, you have to pay for it. And that's a local improvement levy that ultimately you have to get neighbors into. But that's a new asset as opposed to a rehabilitated asset. And so I think that this is just good planning. This is an evolution in the planning that I've seen over time. And I think it's really, really good work. And ultimately, I think it will stand up to the test of time in relation to how we can use it in an appropriate budgeting context. So it's good work in that regard. So thanks for getting it done.
Thank you, Councillor Harris. And next we have Mayor Ketcher.
So just,
Oops.
be
Try
back
it
on.
again.
Sorry,
Oops,
not
hold
used to
on.
being on this side. So the question that I have, because I'm kind of going this way. We talk about neighborhood levy. We talk about local improvement levy. So when you're talking about to get this to a state that it needs to be, that would be an overall city neighborhood levy, not local improvement, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, and I just want to make sure that I have clarity on that, because I wouldn't want to see, you know, if you came into one of our cul-de-sacs, all of a sudden I had to pay an extra $2,000 or $3,000 a year for taxes to do that when it's a public street. So I just want to be very clear that we're talking everybody pays as opposed to to local improvement.
That's correct.
Okay, I'm okay with that. Thanks.
And Councillor Kelly.
Thank you. I had one more question. I said I was done, but I do have one more question and then a quick comment. Grant, is it your plan to, I'm going to back up. I would hate to see this report sort of get shelved and forgot about 5 years down the road when there's been a change in staff or you get reassigned to a different department or something like that. So is there a plan in place to revisit this with council maybe every 2 years? I don't think it needs to be annually. I don't think changes happen that quickly, but maybe every 2 years so that we keep this thing in the forefront?
My intent would be that we keep it updated every year, and then it becomes part of the discussion of the 10-year capital plan. So we're looking at that 10 years all the time, but in the background, the model's being run out for up to 100 years or more.
Okay, as long as if it's part of and built-in process part of the 10-year capital plan, that gives me some comfort. Thank you. It wasn't my intent today to start a debate on whether it's a neighborhood levy or whatever. It was simply to ask Grant a question or two. But I do want to comment. When you buy a house and you examine the house and the shingles are old, you expect that the price of the house is going to account for the old shingles, maybe the old carpeting and the old furnace. Likewise, the price of the house should account for the infrastructure to get the water in and the water out. That's part of the house. And just because it's in the ground doesn't mean necessarily that it needs to be paid by everybody. I don't pay for everybody else's shingles, for instance. I'm going to leave it at that, and maybe we can have another discussion on it now that we've got some cold hard numbers in front of us. A debate or discussion over how we can fund this thing might make more sense going forward. Thanks again, Grant. Much appreciated.
Thank you, Councillor Kelly. I'm just going to make one more comment on that. I guess if that was the way we were looking at it, we have a whole lot of the old city that would owe the city a lot of money. But thank you very much for your presentation. I guess that's all we have for now. No more questions. Does anyone have any councillor inquiries? Or Mayor? Oh, Mayor Ketcher does.
Okay, I have one question, and I don't know if it's for Mr. Fleming or Ms. Duguid-Smith, but I've been driving around, as I'm driving around the city, I'm seeing more and more of these freestyle signs that are being put out in front of commercial businesses. When we had that mayor from the United States come and speak to us, and he said one of the best things you can do is just get rid of them. So I guess the question that I have is, when you look at the freestanding signs in our land use bylaw, there's certain they can be either 30 meters apart or 90 meters apart, depending on the property. But when you're doing the land use bylaw review, is there any consideration to actually getting rid of those? Because they can have a storefront sign, and then out on almost a boulevard, now they've got another freestanding sign saying, oh, free pizza or dental. And as you come downtown and in these commercial areas, it just feels like it's getting so plugged up with them. What can we do with that?
Through you, Madam Chair. It's a good question. Signage is tough. It has a bit of a one-upping effect where everyone's competing against each other, and it can lead to a lot of clutter, which can damage the image of your city. We can take a look at it. If you have specific examples, that would be helpful. We can evaluate whether or not they're in line with the existing bylaws or existing policies. And if they're not, then that does open up a discussion with the Land Use Bylaw Project to assess whether or not our rules are where we want them.
Okay, so secondary question to that. So at one point in time, I thought we actually hired someone in planning to go out and be monitoring to see whether they are complying. And I'm assuming, I looked up the land use bylaw, and I'm assuming probably most of them probably comply with the 30 meters or whatever, but it's just a question that I have is planning through the LUB looking at any further restrictions?
Through the chair, we can take a look at that and get back to you. We did have an enforcement officer. That position has since evolved. And we also have an enforcement policy that prioritizes how we respond to requests. Proactive enforcement is number 3 of 4, so it's not something that we do very often, but if an issue is identified, then we will take action.
Okay, thank you.
Any other councillor inquiries? Seeing none, I will ask for a motion to go into our closed session. And Councillor Macon.
I'll make the motion that we go in camera for matters covered under FOIP.
And cast your ballots. And that is carried unanimously. Thank you very much.